It gives me pleasure, dear friends, to present to you the head of the course, Amatul Hiakanum, who is going to address you on Shoghi Effendi, the guardian, the sign of God on earth. So Hiakanum, please.
Friends, beloved friends, I want to ask you a question. Who does Baha'u'llah belong to? I've been thinking about this a great deal during this marvelous gathering that we have all been privileged to attend. And I often wonder if we ponder on this question, who does Baha'u'llah belong to? No one would presume to say that the sunlight belonged to the east or the west or the north or the south. No one would dare say that the sun that shines in Persia is for some reason or other a better kind of sunlight than the sunlight that shines in the United States of America, or that the sun in Africa is a different kind of sun from that in Southeast Asia, and so on. The sun is far away from us. It shines on everything equally. It is its own master. Nobody owns it. Nobody controls it. Nobody has a monopoly on it. The same thing is true of Baha'u'llah. None of us Baha'is own Baha'u'llah. Sometimes there seems to be an attitude on the part of individuals or of Baha'i institutions, undoubtedly due to their immaturity, that gives one the impression that Baha'u'llah is something that they have an invested right in, as if it were a company that they had bought shares in, or a secret society that they had been initiated into, and that being these very privileged people who have some kind of control of something very exclusive and marvelous, they are going to share it with others under certain conditions. I think all of us must realize, and perhaps all of us do realize, but then not all the Baha'is in the world are in this room. There are a great many Baha'is, alas, who are not privileged to be present in this room. But we must all realize that Baha'u'llah belongs to those who have accepted him. It is not a derived right. This wonderful flower bed behind the stage, these people from different countries that have accepted Baha'u'llah for the most part during the world crusade of Shoghi Effendi, have not a derived right to believe in Baha'u'llah. They have not had it passed on to them second hand by pioneers or institutions. They have accepted Baha'u'llah because he belongs to whoever accepts him and believes in him. Just exactly the way the sunlight belongs to every plant in the world that accepts to grow under its influence. It seems to me that one of the great benefits of this gathering is that we have realized this truth more clearly than ever before. we have seen, and perhaps many of us have bowed our heads before the manifestation of it, how these new people, these people that are so far from the cradle of the faith and the cradle of the administrative order, how they have taken this cause into their hearts. They have distilled its teachings. They love it. They have accepted it. And not only in their hearts, but in their minds. I am rather tired of hearing about the pure hearts of the primitive people of the world. They have pure hearts. And probably per capita, more of them are going to go to the kingdom of heaven when they die than people of my race. Because, of course, it is the pure in heart that enter the kingdom of heaven. I wish that we would appreciate the manifestation of what we have seen here, the wisdom of these people. We heard from one of the Baha'is of Mentawai yesterday, and I got so upset listening to him that I was practically shaking from head to foot, because I had heard a little about Mentawai from Dr. Mahajer and his wife, and I knew how supposedly primitive these people are. He himself said he had a beautiful costume of tattoo on from top to toe, and they live in jungles, and they have a very difficult climate and a difficult country, but I understand a very beautiful one. But what he spoke to us was intelligent and intellectually refined. The same thing was true of the words of Max Kenyarizi from Uganda. It was true of our Bolivian friend. It was true of many of the people who have addressed us from this platform, whom, for lack of a better term, we call primitive. I sometimes wonder if they do not look at some of the manifestations of our civilization and see us very much like monkeys hanging by our tails from trees. I'm not at all sure that they always look at us with admiration and wonder and envy. Literacy, and this is a subject that I feel very passionately about. Literacy and education have nothing to do with intelligence and with wisdom. And I hope that some of the friends in this room who claim to be illiterate will take these words to heart. Christ was illiterate. So were his disciples for the most part. And Muhammad could not read or write. But there were people in their days who could, you know. We might well pause for thought and say, isn't it strange that when there were so many Romans and there were so many people throughout the Middle East in the days of both Christ and Muhammad who had wonderful education and were highly intellectual, that God should have chosen illiterate people to be the signs of his power and glory and to convey to us the living Word of God. Let us not worship false idols. Literacy and education are wonderful things, but they are only a means to an end. They are part of the fundamental teachings of the Baha'i faith, that everyone must be educated, girls and boys, that they must have this great privilege. But it is not a thing in itself. It is a means to an end. If they are educated, then they can read the writings of God. If they are educated, they can study and absorb the teachings of the manifestation of God. I don't think the purpose of literacy and education is to become a professor of astrophysics, because I doubt very much if those professions are pursued in the next world. There has been something also said here of poverty. And as our dear friend from Bolivia said, the abolition of the extremes of wealth and poverty are one of the teachings of Baha'u'llah. We all know how unjust this is and how wrong it is. But as there are a great many poor Baha'is in the world today, in both the East and the West, and in Africa, and in India and Asia, other countries, we must never forget that according to one of the scriptures of the world, the Holy Scriptures, it is the poor and the meek that inherit the kingdom of heaven. And it is more difficult for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. We must be very, very careful not to confuse extreme poverty with lack of dignity of the human soul, with nobility of character, with maturity as a human being. I had the great privilege of going on a trip through Africa to the villages, and 4 of the Central and East African National Assembly members who are here today were my hosts, and I slept in their homes, and I had the great bounty of being with them. And they know, and I know, that they are poor people. But I've seldom been happier. I've seldom been in happier homes. I've seldom met finer Baha'is, or people with more courtesy and consideration for others, more true good breeding and fine feeling than I found in those simple mud huts. And that's why I'm going back to Africa sometime and have a mud hut of my own. Baha'u'llah teaches us that education can be a great veil. The intellect can veil the heart of man from God. I don't know exactly how it works. All I know is that it does work. It should not be so, but it is so. There are a great many people in the world who have not gone pioneering because they were busy getting MAs and BAs and PhDs. There are a great many people in the world who are so educated that they could not possibly be uncomfortable and go and live as some of these marvelous knights of Baha'u'llah have lived during the last 10 years. If that is the kind of education that the Baha'is are advocating, I really suggest that we study the teachings a little more deeply. The purpose of education is to know God and to recognize God and to serve God. It is not to take you further from Him and make you proud before Him and make you cold towards your fellow men. And that is what most of the education, so highly vaunted and admired in the world of the West, is doing today. I'm sorry to say it, but it's true. It seems to me that one of the infinite bounties of God is that all of these children of men, different colors, different cultural backgrounds, are going to be permitted to come into the community of man and create the new world. We all know that our race, obviously I'm white, there's nothing I can do about it at this late hour, but our race has great gifts to give to mankind. I spoke very strongly on this subject one day to a Baha'i pilgrim, and she looked at me with eyes as big as saucers, and she said, Ruya Khanum, you're prejudiced against your own people. And I said, no, I don't think I am prejudiced against my own people, because I'm not supposed to have any prejudice. But I'm also not prejudiced for them. We have wonderful qualities, but we have not got all the qualities. Someone said to me recently, I asked why a certain person had left the pioneer field of Africa and gone home. It wasn't this person, it was some third party that we both knew. Well, she said she got tired of the irresponsibility of the Africans. I'm sure that my African brothers and sisters will excuse me for saying this. We all have our weaknesses. I personally don't even know if this is an African weakness. I'm repeating a story. And I said, well, you know, we all get tired of the weaknesses of other people, and I'm so tired of the backbiting and the inharmony amongst my people that I want to go and change that set of faults for another set, because I'm worn out with this one. I think I'd like to try the other for a change. There is a disease in the world today. Now, you may not think this has very much to do with the life of Shoghi Effendi, but in my own mind it has. There is a disease in the world today, perhaps due to the fact that there are so many human beings in the world, and that modern science has not yet caught up with how to manage our facilities, how to manage the new knowledge that has come to us as a result of the appearance of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. And therefore, we are in this rather messy, confused state of transition in human society. But this disease is regimentation. Uniformity. This strange idea that everybody has to do something the same way and be as alike as somebody else as possible. Now, perhaps the things I'm going to say may irritate some people, and I'm very sorry. I don't want to irritate anybody. But when I had my 40th birthday, I didn't like it at all. I thought that I was really old now, and I was disgusted. Everything under 40 seemed to me possible. But when I reached 40, I felt absolutely miserable. So I decided to give myself a present. And the present I gave myself was that I was going to be myself from then on and say within certain limits what I thought, because I'd been treading very softly and been afraid of other people's opinions up till that age. Now I said, to heck with it, I'm old enough to be what I want to be, and I'm going to be myself. When I say that regimentation is a disease, I think we see it in our societies of the West, where we want everybody to be as like everybody else as possible. It's the machine age, the age of standardization. And as the most powerful and wealthy people, and mistakenly considered the most successful in the world, happen to be the great materialistic civilizations of the West, I think that we who belong to those civilizations have to be exceedingly careful not to be colored as Baha'is by the environment in which we live. Please, friends, if you don't applaud, it will save time, because the time that you are applauding not only distracts my thoughts, which are very feeble at the moment, and almost anything blows them away, but it also takes time. So I suggest that if you don't mind, you don't applaud. What I'm trying to say is this, that this extraordinary desire to impose standardization and uniformity on people is one of the characteristics and one of the evils of this present materialistic civilization of the West. And it is not strictly in accordance with the Baha'i teachings. So I hope that the Baha'is from countries that haven't this passion for uniformity will weigh this and not seek unduly to imitate us. There is a great danger to me in the world that we will find that these people that have this great spiritual vitality, this purity of heart and vision, are seeking to imitate us because for some reason or other we seem to be the top dog and the handsomest dog, and they think that if they are like us, that is undoubtedly the best thing. But that is not according to the teachings of Baha'u'llah. And it is not according to many points of guidance that Shoghi Effendi himself has given us. Unity in diversity is the watchword of the faith. We are not supposed to all be alike. We are supposed to all be different, but within a certain great framework that enables the human race to go forward together, to work, to cooperate, to keep the whole of society, which we know in the end is going to be one society, functioning healthily and rhythmically. But that does not mean that all the parts have to become alike. As I understand the teachings of Baha'u'llah, if they all become alike, it will be a weakness, not a strength. Now, I'm not talking about the end of a 500,000-year Baha'i cycle. I'm talking about something in the world at the present time, as this order of Baha'u'llah penetrates to new countries and is accepted by new people. Don't let us consider that the Persian pattern is the perfect pattern, the American pattern, the perfect pattern, the British or Australian or so on pattern, the right way of doing things. There is no such thing. There is the guidance given in the teachings and so marvelously elaborated and interpreted by Shoghi Effendi, and then there is the way all of us grow into it and help it to become more beautiful and perfect during the coming centuries. Don't let's bother about 500 years from now. Let us just think about what the next steps are and try to conform as closely as possible as we advance to those principles and points of guidance that Shoghi Effendi himself gave us. It is of interest to know that although the Guardian laid down very clearly the principles of the administrative order, which I think are not half as complicated as sometimes we make it, that he encouraged, in writing, thank God, we have his words, on different occasions, different assemblies, to have diversity in secondary matters, even in the administration itself. I don't think that the Friends are familiar with this. You see, our beloved Guardian wrote thousands and thousands of letters to different national assemblies, local assemblies, and individuals in Persian and in English. Now, these have not been compiled. They have not been taken together, and the wisdom in them distilled. One has to dig for these nuggets in the teaching. And I hope that one of the tasks of the coming years will be that more and more of the light that Shoghi Effendi shed upon this order of Baha'u'llah through his letters will be made available to the Baha'is. But there is no doubt that he himself gave this principle to the Friends. He encouraged them to have diversity in secondary administrative matters. He used to write them and say, this is a matter that your assembly is free to adapt the principle in its own way. So it's very good to know that. Another thing that Shoghi Effendi did, and I don't think that the Baha'is are aware of the fact, but it is perhaps one of the greatest testimonials to his wisdom and his vision. He gave different parts of the Baha'i world a burden to bear commensurate with their maturity and strength. Now, if an intelligent person sat down and asked what would be the best and safest way of running a worldwide community that has spiritual assemblies in the bush in Africa and spiritual assemblies in Tehran and London and Paris and New York and so on, they could never find a better way than that. They would say, well, how could he have asked of mature, complex communities living in one part of the world, of one kind of a background, the same thing that he asks of the Dayak tribes that are just coming into the faith by the thousands. This is not reasonable, and Shoghi Effendi did not ask it. And the sooner we realize this, the sooner we will be able to help the development of the faith, I think, to go forward more quickly and on a sounder foundation. When I was, of course, you know, I've had this great bounty in a way, but also great sorrow and burden of being one of the hands in the Holy Land during the last 6 years. And we used to get letters from all over the world and all kinds of problems, and we would hear, for instance, that they weren't holding any spiritual feasts in certain parts of this place or that place, any 19-day feast. So when I went to Africa and visited these shambas, this is true of some parts of Africa, not all of Africa, but it's true of a lot of places in the world. It's true of the Andes. I suppose it's true of the jungle communities out in Southeast Asia. And I thought, now, oh dear, the Baha'is of this district don't get together for their 19-day feast. And then the sun went over the horizon at 6:30, as it always does, 12 hours of light, 12 hours of darkness on the equator, and everybody is living in their own little hut miles apart, and there's grass up to here. I suppose there are snakes in the grass. I never asked, but I think there must be all kinds of things in the grass, particularly at night. And they have no lights and no electricity and no telephones, and they have to work all day long while the light lasts in order to make a living, to go on with their families and educate their children. And how on earth, at the end of the day, would they get together in one place for the 19-day feast? How? Would you like to walk through a snake-infested black wilderness with grass up to the end of your nose to the 19-day feast after working about 10 or 11 hours in the tropical sun? I don't think you would go to the feast. You don't even go when there is a bus stop in front of your door. My point is not that we shouldn't hold 19-day feasts. My point is that this is a great, living, moving, evolving Baha'i world. And we have to understand that it is moving at different paces, that it adapts itself to some extent to the local needs, that everybody cannot live like everybody else, and that we had better look after the beam in our own eyes before we get busy with the motes in other people's eyes. Shoghi Effendi said over and over again, this is a religion of the golden mean. In other words, it is a religion that goes in the middle of the way. It does not go to extremes. He gave us the fundamental things that we had to live by according to the stage of our development. As the Persian Baha'i community had come out of the background of Islam, just the way the faith itself has sprung from the soil of Islam, he knew, as Abdul-Baha and Baha'u'llah before him had known, that these people were privileged, let us put it that way, because that is the correct term. They were privileged to bear more of the burden of the laws of Baha'u'llah, and they were required to toe the chalk line much more carefully and closely than people in other countries. Why? Because their background was different and their capacity was greater. A great many things were asked of the Persian community that had never been asked of us. That was their privilege, that was their responsibility, that was their heritage. Gradually, Shoghi Effendi began to give more of these things to the Baha'is of the West. He began to educate us in obeying the laws of Baha'u'llah and of learning to live according to the very simple procedures, if you would like to call them that, of the Baha'i administrative order. I know my mother used to tell me that Abdul-Baha, when he was in America, used to complain that the American believers didn't like the first thing he told them, and they always wanted it changed. To such an extent that he said the first thing that Abdul-Baha tells you is the best thing for you. But it was often very hard. They just didn't like it. They were like children. It was uncomfortable. And they just begged and begged to be let off and not asked to do anything so uncomfortable. Now, we have grown up, and Shoghi Effendi gave us so many more of the laws and ordinances of Baha'u'llah as the years went by. He wrote to the regional assemblies of Africa and told them what things it was essential that they should tell the Baha'is who were newly enrolled, such as only having one wife and not drinking and keeping the fast if they felt they were able to do it, because it is not a law, it's an ordinance. No one can force you to fast. It's your privilege if you want to. But certain things he gave to the African assemblies to teach the new believers. And they are doing that in Africa. And all of this picture that I'm trying to paint of the different stages of development of the faith in different parts of the world is the evidence of how perfect it is. These are the signs of its life, of its vitality. These are the signs of the wisdom and the guidance of Shoghi Effendi. He brought us all to where we are today. He gave each one of us the measure that we could take. He told us how to go ahead and build the cause in the days to come. That, of course, now is the great job facing us, to carry his instructions onward when we leave this hall. One of the things, the reason I'm telling you this, friends, I will talk about the Guardian in just a moment in detail, I hope. But the reason I'm telling you this is that I may be right and I may be wrong, but these are the thoughts that have been shaped in my mind through long association with Shoghi Effendi and observance of his methods and writing of his letters and so on. We must beware in this world lest we use the Baha'i administration as a means of enforcing our will on other people. The desire to dominate, you know, is a very strong animal characteristic. It is bound up with a desire to survive, the instinct of survival, which we know is one of the greatest instincts in the animal kingdom. With it goes the desire to express oneself and the desire to dominate. Now, I believe very strongly that those people who are elected to spiritual assemblies, which we know are the servants of the community, not the masters of the community, but the servants of the community, that those of us who serve on assemblies or administrative bodies must always be very, very careful that we are not dominating. We must see that the cause is protected, that those things that the guardian gave us to do as functions of spiritual assemblies are carried out. But we must never use these administrative bodies as a means of stifling the believers or dominating them unduly. Implicit obedience to our administrative institutions is the law of God. It gives us the great spiritual strength and cohesion that the Baha'i faith has, which makes it unassailable, locally, nationally, internationally. But nevertheless, this very system enshrines the freedom of the individual, the protection of his or her rights, to cherish the individual, to assist them, to express themselves, and not to feel stifled. You see, again, you have the religion of the golden mean. You have the middle of the way. You don't have dominance by an institution, and you do not have a revolution and defiance by individuals. You have the thing in a very wonderful state of balance. And this, too, is something I think that the Baha'is should meditate on. I can remember how, at the beginning of the crusade, Shoghi Effendi encouraged everybody to go out and pioneer. Many, many people in this room remember those days vividly. Many, many people are new Baha'is, and they don't remember the beginning of this crusade. But Shoghi Effendi, anybody who wanted to go, he said, yes, go. The maimed, the halt, and the blind. There are a number of members of the American National Assembly here, and they will remember an incident which always impressed me very much. In fact, the young man in question is now a middle-aged man. He's sitting in this room. Well, he's not middle-aged. I take that back. Anyway, he's older than he was. But a long, long time ago, he was 17. And he asked the American National Spiritual Assembly to let him go as a pioneer to Latin America. The first plan, I think it was. And they felt that he was too young. And the guardian intervened. And he asked the National Assembly to reconsider it. And he went out, and I remember how immensely proud Shoghi Effendi was that a 17-year-old boy who was too young to vote, too young to be on a spiritual assembly, had arisen and gone out as a pioneer in this great first 7-year plan. He used to mention it very often. The people who went out, I'm talking now, at this particular moment, about people who could pay their own way as pioneers. The people who went out were, many of them, not eminently fitted to do so. They had, I don't know, all kinds of complications, sometimes at home, sometimes wives left husbands and husbands left wives, and old people went out who were in poor health, and people who really, it was almost, you might say, a foolish thing for them to do. But they went out and they pioneered. And I can remember those letters that Shoghi Effendi wrote them. When they asked if they could go, he said, go. Now, administrative bodies that pay for pioneers are, I think, in a little different position because they are the trustees of the monies that the Baha'is, through usually great sacrifice, have contributed. And consequently, they have to morally sift out the people who will accomplish the most if they are going to go out as paid pioneers. I'm sure that is what the people who contribute the money wish them to do. That is only just and fair. But my point is that we would not have won this crusade. We wouldn't have had all these countries opened. We would not be sitting in this hall today so radiantly happy with such a wide representation from the Baha'i world if the Guardian had not encouraged everybody to go forth and serve. That is another thing we must remember. Shoghi Effendi was guardian of the Baha'i faith for 36 years. It has gradually been occurring to me during the last few years that obviously, as he only had 36 years to do it in, he was in a great hurry to give us the necessary light on the things that had been revealed before he passed away. 36 years is not very long to make the picture of what Baha'u'llah's administrative order and world order is as clear as Shoghi Effendi has done it. I sometimes have felt during the last 5 years, and I know my dear fellow hands with whom I have been working in Haifa have felt the same way, that really there seems to be almost nothing he hasn't said, almost nothing that he has not given us to go on with. We have an infinite wealth in this faith. This is the true Baha'i education. If we can study these teachings, we can learn what we really have been given by God in our hands. But he gave us the perfection, or rather, he perfected the administrative order during 36 years. But I want to ask you, what is the administrative order? As I understand it, it is the Baha'i part of the world order. The world order, when it is established, will be the whole political and cultural system of the human race. But that presupposes Baha'i society. But while the Baha'i faith is still contained within itself, while we are not the majority of the people of a nation and consequently cannot function according to the world order in all its fullness, we have the Baha'i administration. And that is going to go on for a long time to come, longer in some countries than other countries. And it was illumination on the Baha'i administration that Shoghi Effendi gave us during 36 years. But why do we feel that everything that is going to carry us forward during centuries of development and evolution can be applied in the first 6 months or 10 years in some place in the world? This is highly unreasonable. And I think that we misread the teachings and we do not understand them correctly when this is our attitude. When I was a girl in Montreal, I remember some of the young people were very excited about having the first Baha'i community. And we wanted to have the tithes and the taxes and the this and the that, and we wanted to live according to what we thought. God knows what resemblance it bore to the teachings. I don't. But we thought we knew. We wanted to start a nice little pattern of Baha'i society somewhere out in the country, a Baha'i village, and live entirely according to the teachings. And Shoghi Effendi wrote back very lovingly and said this was entirely premature. He must have written dozens of letters like that during his ministry, holding back the Baha'is from trying to put a beard on a 6-month-old baby. Shoghi Effendi told us, after we had labored, I think it was for 16 years or so, to create the instruments of the administrative order in the West. And now we had the instrument, we must go ahead and use it. And he said that the purpose of all our labors and the reason we had created this wonderful thing was to teach the cause of God. There is no other call in the world for Baha'is to raise other than the teaching call, friends. The Bab said, go and teach the people. Every breath of Baha'u'llah's teachings is go and teach the people, take my message to the human race, to mankind. Abdu'l-Baha said he wished that he could go on foot himself and teach the people. If he had had the strength, he would have been the one on foot in the Andes and on foot in the jungles and going up the rivers in these dugout canoes and going from village to village in India in an ox cart. To teach the faith is the primary obligation of every single Baha'i in the world. It has been enjoined by the manifestation of God. The Master said if each individual would bring one Baha'i every year into the faith, think of what the world would become. We must not be afraid of teaching. We must teach where there is the capacity. We must teach also, of course, where there is not the capacity. But above all, we must go on teaching and spreading the faith of Baha'u'llah. We cannot rest. We cannot ever dare to say that now we are getting too many numbers and they don't know as much as they should. We are going to stop teaching. That does not exist in the Baha'i religion. And if anyone can show me a text where it says stop teaching until these people know what somebody thinks they ought to know, and then go on and do more teaching, I would like to see it. I don't believe it has ever been written by the Bab Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha, or Shoghi Effendi. Our primary obligation is to teach this faith of God to all the peoples of the world as quickly as possible, as best as we can, and God will bring His confirmations behind. We go ahead, and His unseen cohorts come and help us, and we raise up souls such as the people we have heard speaking from this platform in this hall. You remember with what joy Shoghi Effendi used to announce an increase in numbers? He couldn't wait to send out the news. He used to cable the National Spiritual Assembly of Central and East Africa and ask them, how many have you now? So that he could put it in his next message. He used to come with a shining face to the pilgrims, Persian and Western, and couldn't wait to tell them that, do you know, there are now 6,000 or 10,000 or whatever it was Baha'is in Central and East Africa, and there are so and so many more Baha'is in this country and that country and the other country. Do you suppose that he did not know that these people were not consolidated and they didn't need deepening? Of course he knew it. But deepening comes in many ways. Believing in Baha'u'llah also is a deepening for the soul of man. If we teach fearlessly and welcome these people into the cause of God, God will raise up from amongst them teachers and ways and means of deepening them in the cause. Shoghi Effendi used to say over and over again to the Baha'is do not study the teachings enough. That is certainly true of all of us. There is no excuse when we have the books and when we have had the bounty of literacy and an education for us not studying and reading the writings more. I know many of us don't. I myself don't read the writings as much as I should. The Guardian said something wonderful. Of course, he said so many wonderful things. He said, we are orthodox, but not fanatical. In other words, where it comes to the teachings of the faith that are essential, or the laws, or the ordinances, we are orthodox Baha'is. We believe in them. We are not ashamed of them. We don't have to hide anything. We don't have to pretend that we don't drink because we've got stomach trouble. We just say, thank you, I don't drink, you know. Many, many things that we can hold up our heads proudly and say, no, I am a Baha'i. I'm sorry, that is not my way. But we must not be fanatics. And I have never in my life met a more liberal man than Shoghi Effendi. I don't know how anybody could convey the sweetness and the lovableness of the guardian of the Baha'i faith. Many, many people here had the privilege of meeting him. But, of course, so many of them were denied that bounty. And now I would like to talk to you a little bit about the person, Shoghi Effendi, the personality of Shoghi Effendi. Shoghi Effendi was short in stature. He resembled physically, not so much in his face, but very strongly in his body and in his hands, Baha'u'llah. The master was taller. Abdu'l-Baha had blue eyes. But Shoghi Effendi had hazel eyes. I've never seen such expressive eyes in my whole life. I've never seen eyes that could change so much. Sometimes they were almost golden brown, and other times they were absolutely gray. And when he was enthusiastic about something, he would get so excited that he would open his eyes very wide, and you would see the top of the iris. And I always thought that these beautiful, beautiful eyes looking at you with so much enthusiasm were like two suns rising over the horizon. He had a dark, blackish-brown hair. It was, of course, lighter, I believe, when he was a child, but in the end it was quite dark. And he had a olive skin complexion. He wasn't very dark. He wasn't very fair. He had exceedingly beautiful hands. And the greatest holy leaf used to, he told me this himself, take his hand in hers and say, these are like the hands of my father. Baha'u'llah, in other words. They were what people who study palmistry say are the hands of an intellectual. They were sensitive and highly developed. Our dear Millie Collins said that she never saw hands that seemed to her to convey so much suffering as Shoghi Effendi's hands. When she looked at his hands, she felt almost broken-hearted. That was where she sensed the picture of the great sorrows and afflictions of his life. He was what in Persian is called Mazlum. He was the humblest person that I have ever met in my whole life. And I'm not just speaking words, and I've met a great many people in this world, and some of them were very humble. But I have never in my life met a heart as humble as Shoghi Effendi. He hadn't one speck of personal pride or conceit in his entire makeup. But when it came to the cause of God, he was just like a lion. Insult the cause, threaten the cause, offend him in his kingly majesty as head of Baha'u'llah's faith and the sign of God on earth, and then, believe me, you knew another aspect of Shoghi Effendi. When he was angry, which he was sometimes, justifiably, His voice was just like the crack of a whip. Nobody could withstand his anger. It terrified you. It was the wrath of God. Shoghi Effendi lived an exceedingly simple life. By the time that he did me the great honor of telling me he had chosen me to be his wife, some of the most difficult days that he had passed through had already gone. He became guardian in 1921, and he was married in 1937. He told me that when he first became guardian, he didn't think that he should indulge himself in any way. So for a great many years he didn't have any coffee. He thought that that was perhaps a luxury. When he went away in the summertime, he used to set aside, practically up to the very last years of his life, a budget for himself. And whoever was with him had to live on that budget also. He always, of course, was accompanied by somebody, one of his cousins or his brother who was his secretary. Then other people would come and meet him, of his relatives who were perhaps in Europe. And whether it was 2 people or 7 people, the budget had to suffice. When I was first married and went away with the beloved guardian, he took me to places that, although Mary Maxwell's family hadn't been very wealthy, I had never stayed in my life, such modest places. I remember many times we stayed in the mountains in peasants' homes if we happened to be quite far out in Switzerland, and we paid 1 franc a night for our room, and that was 25 cents. He himself had been living on that scale for a great many years. He told me that when he was in Interlaken in Switzerland, where he used to go because it was the center of mountain climbing and wonderful walks in the mountains that he loved so much, that he had had a little room in a house that was owned by an old retired mountain guide. And he said that he had the attic room at the top, and that when his uncle Ahmad Yazdi came to visit him, who was a tall man, he couldn't stand up in the room. His head banged on the ceiling, and he complained because he found it so uncomfortable. He couldn't even stand upright in the room. And you know, Shoghi Effendi had such a faithful heart for people that he loved, that when he went back with me once and he found this old man had died, he went to visit his grave in the cemetery. Blessed be that man. He used to travel, in fact we both did, 3rd class. And 3rd class seats have progressed nowadays, but before the war they were usually of wood and they were very hard. And if he had any traveling to do overnight, he used to put his rucksack or his bag, whatever it was, roll up his coat, put it under his head, and go to sleep. And although those who were accompanying him were also young, in fact younger than the guardian, and fairly tough young men, they couldn't stand it. They would get absolutely worn out. And they didn't understand how Shoghi Effendi could sleep all night long with his head just on something he'd rolled up on a wooden bench. He loved, as you know, mountaineering. And he used to go for these long, long walks after he first became guardian in the mountains. He climbed some high mountains in Switzerland, but mostly he used to go on the walks, not the actual alpine climbs, although, as I say, he did do some of those. He went with guides and in parties and was roped and so on. He loved it. He seemed to find a great comfort from the mountains. Even up to the end of his life, he had this great love for the mountains. And you know, friends, it's a great source of happiness to me that last summer of Shoghi Effendi's life, he went back to all the places he loved most. He took such joy in it, all the places that were particularly dear to his heart. He went back to that last summer. One of the strongest characteristics of the guardian was his absolutely iron principle. Nothing could interfere with what he considered right. Nothing swayed him at all. Neither love, nor hate, nor danger, absolutely nothing. Had no effect on him whatsoever. I remember after I was in Haifa a short time, the municipality put up on the little street in front of the house the name of Baha. They called it Baha Street, as I remember, and the guardian was furious. And he sent his brother to the municipality right away, and he said, tell them to take that down immediately, that this is an insult to the Baha'i faith to put the name of its prophet on a street. And if they don't, I will tear it down with my own hands. And if they want to put me in jail, let them. And then I was very upset because I thought, what shall I do to get into jail, too? They'll take him to jail and I'll have to stay here. I'm going to tell you another example of this principle in Shoghi Effendi. It will make his dear son, who is sitting here in the hand of the cause of Aragha, very happy. Although it affects his father, it's such a wonderful example. It's so wonderful that his father was such a marvelous Baha'i, could be the example of this thing in the guardian that was so marvelous. You know, Aragha was the one who went with the master amongst his party to America. And he was the keeper of the hukuk. And he was the most distinguished person amongst the friends in Persia because of this exalted position that he had. And he'd been made a hand of the cause. And he asked permission to come to Haifa. And I was very excited. I thought, isn't this marvelous? Because I knew the guardian loved him. He will be coming to Haifa, and that will be so nice for Shoghi Effendi. So I said, when will he be coming? And Shoghi Effendi said, well, he'll be coming when his turn comes. And I said, Shoghi Effendi, you mean that the Amin Hukuk, the hand of the cause, is going to take his turn? And he said, why shouldn't he? You see, it's these things that made him worthy to be our guardian. It is these things that we must learn from. It made no difference to him in the whole world who anybody was. If there was a matter of principle involved, the principle applied to them just exactly and precisely as if they were the littlest Baha'i on the whole planet. And it was these examples of Shoghi Effendi's a diamond-like integrity that strengthened and sustained me during so many tests in Haifa when many, many people, as you know, his relatives were turning against him and leaving the faith. Every time I heard this kind of thing from the Guardian, it was just as if chills went up and down my spine, and I said, this cause is safe. Nothing can happen to it, because look what man we have at the head of it. Nothing affects him. He goes on his way, absolutely impervious to praise, to condemnation, to love, to hate, to anything. Man of principle and of character.